Okay, folks, we're back. Nerdy Pastor here, and we are going to do a third part of our how to read, how to plan to read theology books in this kind of short series I thought to do to help many of you that had questions about reading in general, just habits and rhythms of reading. Why do you read? What books should you read? How should you read a theology book and not just read for speed, read for quantity? But you do want to read also for the goal of retaining and having a retention goal in mind. And a handful of you have asked me about that. And I thought I would say, well, there's a little bit of a strategy to that. I think, what comes immediately to my mind is simply familiarity is the first thing. And we'll kind of talk a little bit about that. But sometimes, what works for some people doesn't work for somebody else. So I am not trying to in any way give you some sort of kind of law, how this is how it works, this is the formula. But I will tell you what's worked for me, and maybe some of that will help you and work for you. But again, this kind of goes back to the first video on how to build a rhythm and a habit. A lot of it is how do you learn, and how are your habits being formed, and are you being intentional to build those habits? I do think retention connects a lot based upon how you learn and how you are building habits into your life, and then it kind of starts to stick with you more regularly, okay? It's also kind of a discipline in a sense of memorizing and familiarity too, so that will kind of work into it as well. But here's just a few things I put down to talk about how to read theology books with a goal for retaining what you've read, to remember what you've read. And so a couple thoughts, a couple insights, at least in my experience, is I would say the first is your mindset that you want to dialogue. All right, so I think that sounds simple, but a lot of people I have met really don't know how to dialogue with a book. They don't know how to work with an author. They just kind of consume it like it's a buffet or something, instead of going to the book and understanding this person is alive. And if they know Christ, they're alive. You're talking with a living person in a way. You're having a conversation with somebody. It's a conversational kind of activity. And so if you're going into it with the mindset of, I want to learn from this person, I want to engage with this person, I want to dialogue with this person, instead of just kind of treating it like a monologue or treating it like something you're just kind of consuming, I think what you'll do is you'll start to engage with it in a more healthy, and I think you will retain it better because you're thinking it kind of more as a living document of some kind, that it's coming from someone who is a conversational partner. I think of my library as a bunch of friends. I think even John Calvin said that too. His library was filled with friends. Edward said, in his library he was brushing up with all the martyrs. I mean, that's a pretty profound thing to think about, but it's really true. You're not only amongst friends, but you're amongst the martyrs. As you engage with these books, it's not just this kind of dead information for you just to kind of consume. It's for us to engage with kind of living, breathing, if they know Christ, in Christ, alive people. And there's a sense of conversation and dialogue, I think, with these folks, that if you have a mindset of dialogue with the author or authors, I think there will be a mindset of retaining better, because you retain better when you see it as a conversation. You remember conversations more as you engage, I think. So I think that's the first thing, is the mindset of dialogue, the mindset of conversation, the mindset of going to a book as a friend and as a partner, someone that you are engaging in with actively. I think that's the first thing. The second thing I would say is you need to find others to talk about this with. So one, thanks for coming to my channel and engaging with comments and listening and I think enjoying, hopefully, what's being shared. I think that that's a really important practice, that you invest in a number of relationships to dialogue about reading books with. Reading groups are not super popular in the world unless you're maybe at a library or something like that, book clubs and some things like that. But traditionally, with Reformation churches especially, book clubs are a big deal. Pastors and seminarians and those have always talked to me in side conversations I've overheard many times from people, that they've learned a lot from their reading groups they've been in. So I would tell you, secondly, is that you need to find others of like mind that you can dialogue about with. Might be great to ask your pastor if he has a reading group, or there's somebody in the church that cares about theology, that has kind of an interest like you might have, to meet in a coffee shop in the morning and to go through books together. But find people to dialogue about this with. So not only should you have a mindset of conversation with the authors, but you should have a mindset of conversation with many, many others in your life that have some similar interests as you do, and create some dialogue partners that you can get together with and talk through this stuff with. I found that to be in my life a big game changer for me, and it happened, first in seminary, 15, 16 years ago. But when you find those kind of like-minded people that will talk through things with you and have similar passions as you do, you learn and retain a whole lot more that way. Even though you've read the book, you kind of soak up the book better when you talk about that book with somebody else, or you both are reading the same book and discussing that book. The third thing I would say is that you are a good note taker in your reading. So this might be you take notes on a pad somewhere, or you have a digital thing where you keep notes in the reading or highlight things or whatever it is. But some kind of way that you engage with the text in a way that helps you write down or put down on paper or just a digital form your thoughts as you engage with this kind of dialoguing, conversational endeavor. And I think that's a big part of it, is that you engage with it, you write down your thoughts, your questions, your prayers. Those things are important. So what I tend to do is I write down questions. I go back 10 years, 15 years ago. I read books that I read before, and I look through them again. I see the questions I had in those books, the concerns I had of what they said, or the agreements someone had, and how some of that's flip-flop in my life. But it's fun to see how I engaged with those books at that time and retained it better. So write down your questions, write down your affirmations, write down your prayers. Many times I'll read something very convicting and I'll write down, Jesus, help me. Help me to believe this. Help me to trust you. Help me to understand how real this is. Help me to dig into this reality. Or Lord, this can't be it. It's not right? So engage with the text with not just academic note taking, but personalize it. Understand how it relates or doesn't relate to you, and write that down in your notes, whether it's off script or on script. Write those things down and engage with the text in a way that you actually are writing down thoughts and engaging not just conversationally, but actually putting it down on paper. I also do use a tab system, especially for books that I really need to dig into. I still will use tabs casually, or post-it notes casually, for books that I kind of casually go through. Like if I read a book on C.S. Lewis, he'll have from time to time something very profound to say, or something very interesting or intriguing to say. I don't tab everything that he says like that, but when he says something that is memorable, that is helpful for me, how I remember something or how it's connected to me, I will tab that with a certain kind of tab, not an arrow tab, but just kind of a post-it tab, to note that's a good insight that I can go back to and glean from. And some books will have, just 2, 3, 4 of those in there. Some will have 100, to be honest. It depends on the mood I am. Sometimes I want to, really soak it up. Sometimes I just want to casually read through it. So it doesn't always have to be so intense. Some books I just want to casually read through to get the gist of something. I was reading Death in the City the other day by Schaeffer. And everything he was saying was memorable. Everything he was saying. But I just tabbed 6 or 7 things he had to say because I loved how he was interpreting Jeremiah in that book. And I liked that. That's what I wanted to take away. Even though you could have tabbed all sorts of things in the book. So you don't need to get too formulaic, because that rigidity can kind of wear you out a little bit. Because when you start to use tabs and notes, then you feel like you've got to bring that to everything you read, and then it becomes cumbersome and you start to lose kind of the reason you're doing that. So only use tabs when it's kind of like, I really want to remember this for this specific purpose, but make sure it's a habit that's helpful, that it doesn't bog you down too much, is what I would say. So I use 2 kinds of tabs, and they're always colored, and I try to use the same colored tab throughout the book as best I can. They're not that expensive. And then I also use arrowed tabs for kind of a big takeaway from the book. So not everything's a huge takeaway in the sense of there's lots of memorable things to be said. There's a lot of things to kind of store away. But sometimes those arrows that I put down in my books, I'll try to find you one. Yeah. Concise Reformed Theology. See, there's a couple tabs here that are arrow tabs. There's a couple that are just normal tabs. And I'm like, whoa, that's a big point. I remember a couple of these were on how the Dutch theologians were interpreting Karl Barth and his misunderstanding of law and grace. And I was like, the way they said it was a huge takeaway for me. I understood that he'd mixed them, but the way that they talked about it really put it together in this very simple way to understand. That's why the book's called Concise Reformed Dogmatics. And it really was a very memorable takeaway of like, that's a really easy way to remember how he understands this point of doctrine that I can kind of just go back to time and time again. So I don't always go back to every tab. I go back to a lot of those arrow tabs though, in a lot of ways. So note-taking, writing in the books, personalizing your questions, your prayers, your disagreements, your affirmations, that really helps remember and retain. And then lastly, reading to challenge yourself is important. And I said this, and I think it was my first, or I can't remember, it might have been my second video. I think it was my second video. But if you are always reading the same kind of level of stuff, like difficulty level, if everything you read is devotional or just Bible commentaries, you will find yourself kind of glazed over sometimes and not really retaining what they're saying. Sometimes you need to challenge yourself with a very hard theology book that might not agree with a lot of what you have to say and think. And you're not trying to read it to change everything about your life, okay? But you're reading it to challenge yourself both intellectually, maybe devotionally even, but also for linguistic ability and for retaining ability. I read recently Catherine Sonderegger's first volume, The Doctrine of God, from her trilogy of books, and it is a very, very challenging book to read. But I read that book knowing I wasn't going to get everything she had to say the first time I read it through, but knowing that coming out of that, I was going to feel so much more kind of expanded in my ability to engage and retain, because the concepts that she was giving me were so pregnant with so much at one time that my retention would go up. And it has. It actually has. I'm not only able to read faster, I'm able to conceptualize some things I've read recently much quicker. So the retention part is also, have you expanded yourself by challenging yourself to read harder books? Puritan paperbacks are, fairly easy to read. They're devotionally rich and wonderful and just kind of almost like a feast on truth. But they're not hard to read, okay? So it might be good to break out Francis Turretin and read some scholastic method theology in a more traditional way. It might be good to break out Charles Hodge and read some of his to challenge yourself on, how he saw evolutionary theism, which was kind of challenging at that time and still remains challenging, but see how he was reasoning through that. Or, one of my favorites, R.L. Dabney, and how he talks about philosophy from, Thomas Hobbes and on, and read through things that are harder for you, not because you're going to get it all, but because you're going to challenge yourself to try to retain more, because your conceptual understanding of things gets expanded. So there are different ways to grow your attention. I do think that you have to have a mindset to converse. If you just want to know something just to know it, you just won't remember a whole lot else, because your mindset's just to kind of learn this one little fact and kind of move on. But if your goal is to engage and kind of relish and cultivate a conversation with the reading that you have, and to see your books as friends, and like Edward says, also the martyrs of the church, it becomes a little bit more reverent in how you engage with people in the books. And then if you find some discussion partners, they will help you retain as well. Talking about the books you're reading and the ideas that you have will expand your retention. It will help cement your retention. I have 4 reading groups I'm in. 2 of them I do with my church as one of the pastors here. One of them I do with my sister, and another one I do at the seminary that's for free. So you can find them anywhere. You just have to look and you'll find some. You just remember, make it fit your interest. Don't just start to do big books because they're hard, but do books also that connect with your interests too. But find some dialogue partners that will build into you as you build into them. And I think that will help. Then do some good note-taking. Find a system that works for you. Don't make it into a law where it becomes this kind of rigid, formulaic thing. It becomes almost weighs you down and burdens you, that you feel you've got to always use those methods. Sometimes I don't even take notes, okay? Sometimes I'll just open a book. I was opening a book just the other day. I just opened the book up that I just had bought, and I didn't take any notes. I didn't have a pen. I was just reading to read for casual joy. and I still remembered some of it pretty good. But what I'm trying to say is don't approach every book with this kind of rigid formula on retention. You will retain more as you expand your reading habits and those things. And then sometimes you just know you got to hunker down and use notes and use writing and use tabs and these things to remember denser books and things like that. So you'll kind of figure it out as trial and error kind of has its chance to work it out. And then lastly, challenge yourself to retain more. So, it's kind of like, I guess, if you're younger, you eat a whole pizza, and because your stomach is endless and you have no sense of calorie or caloric intake. And, then you get older, you realize that your stomach says, stop, you're gonna end us. There's kind of these different capacities that you have. But if you eat more, your stomach can take more. If you eat less, your stomach's like, hold on there. It's a little bit like that in reading, to be honest. If you're reading books that are very challenging from time to time, suddenly you can read faster and read more. Like I was reading C.S. Lewis' Surprised by Hope with one of my reading groups the other day, and I can read 3 chapters of his book in 45 minutes. Whereas it used to take me hours to read that much, but you get what he's saying so quickly because it's not hard to read. Because you're reading Catherine Sonderegger, or you're reading Francis Turretin, or you're reading Charles Hodge, or you're reading, some concise dogmatics book, or something very, very rigid and challenging from time to time. And so it allows you to grow in your speed and your retention and your ability to understand conceptually what you're reading. So I think those combinations of things should help you. I would not try to do all of them at one time. Just want to warn you with that. If you're not used to taking notes, you're not used to engaging the book conversationally, you're not used to having dialogue partners, don't try to do all that at one time. Just try to say, you know what? I'm going to read a book I like, and I'm going to try to find somebody or a group I'm going to read it with. That might be a good plan. Or if you can't find someone to read a book with, you simply say, I'm going to put this book down, I'm going to take out a pen, and I'm going to write in my personal thoughts with the book. Underline, highlight, use some Post-its, and engage the book that way. Okay? Or if you've been reading for a while and you've said, you know what, I'm kind of getting stagnant a little bit of reading, my retention's not super good, challenge yourself to read a much harder book than you would normally read and allow yourself to be frustrated. You might read, I think it's back, I don't know, I can't remember where I've got it back there. No, down here. Yeah, that's probably right there. But Jürgen Moltmann, and not a well-known conservative evangelical Christian of any kind, but he is kind of a generally broad, reformed, kind of ecumenical believer. He's got some really meaty stuff, and then he's got some really bony stuff that's not very good at all. But you kind of have to know, what's what sometimes, and you have to kind of be willing to read for that. But I do really enjoy a lot of his books because it challenges me to read so much more intently. So every time I read a Moltmann book, or I read a Bonhoeffer book, I read Sonderegger, I understand that these folks are going to challenge me way beyond most of my limit. But as I do that, I'm able to expand. And so if you've kind of gotten yourself into a stale kind of, pattern or habit of reading, challenge yourself with a much harder book. I mean, good grief, maybe a John Owen volume. Read one of those and just let yourself get frustrated, because you're not going to retain it all, you're not going to remember it all, and you're not going to understand it all, but you're going to be expanded as you go. You're going to be growing as you read. So hope that helps a little bit. I think maybe 1 or 2 of those principles might help you in your retention and your habits of retaining what you read. And having good conversations with people about these things really does help. So keep putting your comments down there. Keep giving me your insights as well. That I think will help me, and it should help you and others as well. Okay, sign off for now.